Yoichi was a forest-dwelling loser who spent his entire life training in the mountains. His life suddenly changed when he got sent to high school and decided to use his insane samurai skills to clap everything in a skirt. This story starts in a river where Yoichi used his family's air slice technique to catch some fish. On his way back, he fed some of his nature buddies to stop them from attacking him. Suddenly, he sensed an attack and used his technique to block the arrows before running to escape the log traps set up for him. He had just blocked the last rain of arrows when an old geezer tried to take him out with a surprise attack. He easily blocked the attacker, who turned out to be his dad, before heading home, where he sat for another lesson. Tired of breaking his old back, his father got pissed and told him that he had run out of training programs. Yoichi had already mastered everything at 17, but he still wanted to learn more, so his dad told him it was time for him to leave the mountains. He was tired of watching him try to catch the animals talking at night, so he decided to send him to the city, hoping he still had enough brain cells left to communicate with other people. Somewhere in the city later on, the purple-haired hottie had made breakfast for the girls in the dojo. After hearing something at the door, Kagome went to check it out and woke the others up with a scream. Ibuki found her on the floor terrified and saw an arrow from Yoichi's dad on the wall. After reading the letter he sent, they all sat to discuss it, and Ayam immediately rejected the idea of having a stranger in the dojo. She got into an argument with Ibuki because they had never actually seen Mr. Karasuma before, but Ibuki countered by saying their families had history. Ayam eventually lost the argument when Chihaya also supported the idea of a random otaku living with them. While they sat to eat their breakfast, Yoichi had made it to the city and couldn't believe his eyes. He was about to go find the dojo with a map when he bumped into a random dude struggling to grow his goatee. After Wasen told him that his outfit was an aura sponge, he kicked his sword. Pissed off, Yoichi pulled out the sword and got into a stance while telling Wasen to say his last words. Wasen was about to finish another roast when Yoichi's sword tossed him like a bag of chips. Yoichi immediately got arrested and ended up at the police station, explaining why he was in the city. He was drinking a cup of tea while chatting with the officers when he remembered that he had somewhere to be and casually jumped off the balcony before leaving. Outside a mall, the girls from the dojo had all been waiting for Yoichi, who Ibuki said they would recognize with his signature air slice technique. Ayame and Chihaya then decided to go shopping while Kagome went to use the little lady's room. Around the same time, Yoichi made it to the mall and struggled to understand how the elevators worked, so he used an escalator to get to higher ground. After falling into a cleaning cart, he crashed into a dressing room when he saw Chihaya. Before she could scream, he held her mouth closed and squeezed her mini melons to get his first taste of human contact. She immediately cracked his nuts with a brutal back kick and called the cops when he tried to escape. Just then, a purse snatcher stole a lady's purse, and after he got away on the elevator, Yoichi went to use the escalator where he ran past Wasen. After seeing the purse snatcher on another floor, he chased him into a bookstore and crashed into Chihaya's fish cakes. After surviving the brain-melting stench, he went back on his chase and eventually caught up to the snatcher. Using his technique, he took him down and realized that he was way behind schedule when he checked the time on the guy's watch. After realizing that he was lost later on, Yoichi started wishing he was back in the woods. Just then, he saw Kagome, who had gotten lost and couldn't find her sisters, who had also realized that she was missing and were headed into the mall to find her. Yoichi promised to help her find Ibuki, but first, he needed a description. All she could tell him was that Ibuki had mega melons, so he pointed out the melons in the mall looking for one that was identical. When she saw Ibuki and pointed her out, the cops showed up and told him to surrender. Determined to get Kagome to her sister, he used the hook holding up the mall's decorations to swing to the other side. Using his technique, which Ibuki immediately recognized, he got Kagome across safely, but he fell back and landed on a train outside the mall that immediately took him away. Later that evening, he got off the train and was standing on a bridge frustrated when Ibuki showed up. She introduced herself and thanked him for his help with Kagome, but all he could focus on were the 2 mega-sized milkers she was carrying around. A cop suddenly showed up and interrupted their moment to arrest him, but he later got his freedom back after the lady who got her purse snatched vouched for him. Ibuki then took him to the dojo, where the other girls were waiting and realized that he was the otaku who had attacked them at the mall. With a smile on his face, he introduced himself and promised to ask permission next time. The next day, Ibuki was getting some water and remembered the talk she had with the girls after she brought Yoichi home. Ayame had told them about the dressing room assault, But Ibuki was convinced it was an accident, since her lack of estrogen made it hard to tell if she was an actual girl. After getting the water, she went to the training room, where Yoichi was already getting a workout in. He greeted her and saw the bucket of water, so he offered to help her with the cleaning. After struggling to get the bucket out of her hands, she slipped and ended up getting soaked while his brain went into hyperdrive. A note slipped out of his pocket, so she caught it and read all the things he was planning to do to her melons. After she kicked him into the third layer of the atmosphere, he fell into Inam's room. The girls showed up moments later and saw him using the fall as another opportunity to see if Inam actually had melons. He took another beating from Ibuki before joining them for breakfast moments later with his nose leaking blood. Seeing the time, Ibuki said it was time for them to head to school and asked Yoichi to come with them. On the way there, Chihaya and Inam were trying to figure out if taking him along was a good idea. When he stopped them to ask Ibuki to introduce him to the Mega Melon baddies at school, Inam ran away, telling him to keep his aura-draining personality away from her. Wasen, who happened to be a student at their school, made his way in and kept thinking about the beating Yoichi gave him the previous day. Torigaya had also shown up to walk together when he suddenly hid behind a tree. He apparently had a crush on Ibuki and was trying to sneak a peek at her melons when he saw his new arch-nemesis talking to her. After, Yoichi introduced himself in class and told them he was staying with Ibuki. Hearing that, Wasen put on an embarrassing display of confusion that took off any aura point he had left. When he saw Ibuki laughing at him, he thought she hated his guts and swore vengeance on Yoichi. Later on, Ibuki finished up in the bathroom, where she explained her new living situation to two classmates. When she got back to class, Yoichi had been surrounded by more rice cakes than he could handle. They were asking him a bunch of questions about his life in the mountains, but all he could think about were the cultured activities he could do with them. Ibuki called him back to reality with death in her eyes and pulled him aside to explain the importance of self-control after beating some sense into his head. Wasen was on his way to class when he saw them at the stairs and heard Ibuki telling Yoichi about the other girls. Thinking the cultured samurai was doing something wrong to his precious Ibuki, he climbed up to them and challenged Yoichi to a second fight. Ayan was with a counselor talking about why she was getting bad grades when she heard that Yoichi was fighting Wasen and left to see. With all the other students watching, Yoichi told Wasen to consider a transplant if he wanted a goatee that bad. Wasen then got into a boxer's stance before charging in and landing the first hit of the right cross that almost put Yoichi to sleep. Yoichi then put his sword aside to make the fight fair and dodged all of Wasen's punches until one came in too fast for him to see and took him down. Wasen whipped out a pair of spiked knuckles and waited for Yoichi to get back up before he tried to attack him again. Using his bare hand, Yoichi chopped the knuckles to pieces and used a high kick to the brain to drop Wasen. With a smile on his face, he told him to try again and after getting strong enough to fight without a weapon. Wasen was already considering skipping town to escape the embarrassment when Ibuki gave him a napkin and told him to take care of himself. After she left with Yoichi, he regained his confidence and decided to be the one to free her from the cultured samurai. Later that day, Ayam got back home and found out that Yoichi had gotten a fever. While she left to go make him some porridge, she struggled to convince herself that she didn't want a taste of his mountain wood. After Ibuki gave him another beating before leaving to do some shopping, Chihaya told him that she started being aggressive after their parents went on a side quest that they still had not returned from. In the kitchen, Inam had almost blown up the entire dojo with her cooking and tried to hide her incompetence from Kagum when she showed up. She offered to help and promised to keep her lack of skills a secret, so Ayam accepted, and they actually managed to make something that wouldn't finish Yoichi off. She went to give him the food, but he wasn't in his room when she got there. She saw him at the entrance laughing with Ibuki, who had just come back from shopping, and ran off with the food. Remembering that she had always been in Ibuki's shadow, she tripped after getting into her room and accepted her fate. Just then, Yoichi had followed her and saved the food, but he ended up falling out the window in the process. She ran out and saw him under a tree with his limbs still in place, asking if she had made the food herself. Before she could finish with her reluctant answer, he had started taking bites and complimented her cooking. By then, the others had shown up and were surprised to see her smiling for once. Also surprised, Yoichi complimented her smile, and her dopamine levels shot through the roof, ending in her kicking the food away to hide her craving for attention. After two weirdos got out of the train station, Tsubasa, the midget girl, fell in love with everything she saw after dreaming of the city all her life. Angela, who likely failed at her WNBA dreams, reminded her to focus on taking out Yoichi with their Subane technique. Not ready to enter assassin mode yet, Tsubasa left her with a stuffed bear and ran away. At the dojo that morning, Ibuki was cleaning, and her melons were triggering Iam's body dysmorphia. When Ibuki and Yoichi asked her why she was helping out, she remembered the conversation she had with Chihaya and Kagome. They knew Yoichi's Riz game had gotten to her, but with Ibuki's melons constantly being in his face, she had to step it up by finding other ways to be around him. At school, the teacher brought in Tsubasa, who introduced herself and caused a small riot when the educated otakus couldn't get enough of her cuteness. Yoichi also pointed out the benefits of her petite physique and got his face restructured by Ibuki's fists. On a tree outside the class, Angela watched with pride as she thought Tsubasa had chosen to enroll so she could easily take out Yoichi, but she had other ideas. Later, Tsubasa got surrounded by her classmates, who started interrogating her. Unable to tell them that she had spent her life in the woods, she started to freak out. After Ibuki told a classmate to drop his ball, he accidentally sent it flying to Tsubasa's head. Her assassin reflexes kicked in, and she sliced the ball in half with her fingers. Seeing that her little demonstration had freaked out the rest of the class, she thought her dreams of having a normal life were over. Just then, Yoichi showed up and complimented her skills after telling her he was also a new student. Ibuki immediately told him to stop trying to riz her up and told their classmates to give her space. After spending the rest of the day having fun with Yoichi and Ibuki, while Angela watched in confusion, Tsubasa left. On the way out, she bumped into someone and tried to flash her rice cakes to see if he would like it. Unimpressed, Torigaya told her to get her underbaked cakes out of his face and demanded an apology. The guy she bumped into turned out to be Wasen, who told her to try being a little more careful before leaving with Torigaya. She immediately became obsessed with his Sigma Riz, but then Angela popped out of a bush to ask if she had completed the mission. A mysterious man had offered to fund their dojo if they took out Yoichi, so their life in the woods depended on her success. Still obsessed with regular life, she escaped from Angela again and ran into Yoichi and Ibuki. They had just asked if she wanted to walk with them when Angela caught up to her and ripped off her uniform, leaving an outfit that tripled her clap appeal. Angela demanded a duel between Tsubasa and Yoichi, who had already lost his senses to her mini-plot and had to be snapped out of it by Ibuki. Ibuki had gone to get her clothes when she attacked Yoichi with some brutal heel kicks that sent him flying into a bush. Seeing her now emotionless face, Angela explained that Tsubasa entered the zone whenever she endured peak embarrassment. Yoichi tried to get her to stop and instantly took the dreaded fish lips to the face samurai move. She was about to finish him off when Wasen distracted her with his nonchalant rise game. After taking a closer look at the fight, Wasen thought Yoichi had found a new victim. He went over to Tsubasa and told her to let him handle the samurai creep while covering her up with his jacket. His alpha attitude knocked her out of her emotionless state, and she left. Angela chased after her and eventually found her on a bench crying. When she tried to talk to her, Tsubasa refused to listen and said she hated her, so she left. At the dojo that night, Yoichi went out to face Angela, who had shown up to handle business on her own. After introductions, she attacked him and ripped off his sash. But he also tore up the first layer of her outfit, revealing a blacked-out bodysuit that barely managed to contain the monstrosities on her chest. She turned to face him, but the jiggles of her melons left him paralyzed with an endless nosebleed. The girls had shown up by then, and Ibuki asked her to explain why she was after him. She told them about the client who hired them to take him out so they could afford to keep mastering their technique. When she tried to take him out with her nails of death, he caught them with his fingers and told her she was too weak to take him out. He explained that Ibuki had anger management issues but still managed to keep the dojo running with the little they had. With his hands on her shoulders, he told her to keep her technique alive even if she had to do it broke, so she left. She eventually ran into Tsubasa, who then ran to give her a hug while apologizing for her anger earlier and asking her to drop the mission. Feeling bad for what she had put Tsubasa through, she apologized and agreed to drop the mission. A couple of days later, Yoichi was with Ibuki after school, talking about how they had not seen Tsubasa since the fight when she fell in front of them. She had taken up a part-time job as a delivery girl, and Angela was also working as the chef, turning the local men into simps with her skills. After Angela thanked Yoichi for his advice, Wasen showed up with Torigaya, terrifying Tsubasa with his aura. She went to grab his jacket and couldn't speak properly as she was screaming while trying to give it back. Thinking she was homeless, he told her to keep it and left, unintentionally hitting her with another stroke of riz as he left. Outside the dojo the next morning, Jaya took a call from a manga editor and scheduled a date to turn in her latest piece. Later that day, a bunch of kids were at the dojo watching Yoichi spar with Ibuki. Yoichi got a little too excited and ended up hitting her with a technique that nearly tore open her melons. Moments later, the students were outside the dojo, looking like they had fought off a pit bull, and left while Ibuki turned to face Yoichi, who looked even worse. When he told her that her tendency to break the dojo students' faces was likely why they were going broke, she got defensive, and Ian decided to head back in to avoid her. She went to take a bath and was thinking about the sparring session when Shania scared her. She had noticed Iam's attempts to get clapped by Yoichi, but when she asked her about it, Iam denied having such intentions. Chihaya then decided to go get a workout with Yoichi to see if it would help her get out of her writer's block. While she got ready for the workout, Wasen was outside the dojo, planning to use Ibuki's napkin as an excuse to see her. He planned to have his happily ever after with her after taking out Yoichi, but as he took his first step, he sensed his aura points vanishing due to his dirty shoes. Knowing he was setting himself up for a brutal rejection, he ran away. Yoichi was in the compound later that evening getting cleaned up when Chihaya called him and took him inside while Ibuki watched them from her window. In Chihaya's room, he couldn't take his eyes off one of her cultured mangas and told her he liked how she paid attention to detail. She got excited and started listing out all the corn websites she used to get her ideas. When he started swinging his wooden sword to cancel out the blood flowing to his personal wood stick, she remembered her mission and asked if she could help him relax his stick. Not ready for such direct advances, he tried to avoid the question by talking about his jungle life, but she stood on business. She got closer and whispered all the cultured skills she had perfected while squeezing him into her melons. Seeing that he still needed to push, she tried to give him a peek, and he reacted by shoving her away. He told her that he didn't like working out with people younger than him, and she started laughing, telling him she was just messing with him. Just then, Ibuki showed up after sensing some PDF activity, and Chihaya immediately played the victim card. After she gave him the regular beating, Jaya called her out for secretly being jealous. She denied the allegations, but Chihaya was convinced and left them together so they could finish what she started. Later that night, he was coming back from his sleepwalk when he noticed that Chihaya was still working on her manga. After school the next day, Kagome got back home with her art project to show them and opened the door to see Yoichi trying to escape a concussion. After he ran into her, her project got ruined and he got kicked out. Ibuki then sent him to take Chihaya's notebook to her while she fixed up Kagome's project. At school, he somehow ended up in the girls' changing room while Chihaya was in class writing on her manuscript. The teacher eventually saw her and scolded her while some of the boys in the class watched. They'd all suddenly heard the students chasing Yoichi moments later, and she got her note from his shaking hands as he barely escaped getting sent to his maker. When he asked about her non-existent sleep routine, Jaya told him that she had a deadline to meet and left to get back to class. He was on his way down the stairs when he saw the boys in her class trash-talking her and got pissed. When they hinted at having done something to her, he ran back to her class and saw her standing over her ripped-up manga. He tried to go take care of her classmates, but she stopped him, claiming she was okay and the one at fault for drawing in class. After pushing him out the door, she shut it behind him and started crying while he listened. Moments later, the boys were on their way out, talking about how Chihaya was a tryhard, while Yoichi watched them from above like Batman on a day shift. He did a superhero landing in front of them and hit them with a punchline from The Dark Knight, before knocking them down with his technique. The redhead gang leader still tried to talk back, so he grabbed him by the neck and told him to shut his pie hole before releasing him to unleash a knockout move. Moments later, Chihaya came out and saw them barely conscious on the floor. That night at the dojo, Kagome accepted Ibuki's lazy attempt at a fix-up job, and Chihaya made her manga's main character look similar to Yoichi as a way of thanking him. On his way to classes with Ibuki the next day, Yoichi was talking about his recently interesting life when a shy baddie stopped him with a letter in her hand. After telling him to read it, she ran away with her friends giggling. The boys around him told him that she was a first-year named Hinagata, who was as famous as Ibuki for her melons and unbeatable face card. In class moments later, Ibuki read in the love letter that also had an invitation to a date. The Jungle Boy still didn't know what a date was, so she gave him a book that explained it. Once he understood what it meant, his dopamine receptors went off and Ibuki cracked his skull out of jealousy before walking out. Realizing that his lack of experience might lead to an embarrassing cherry popping, Ibuki, went back to the class and demanded a date with him. After the entire class went nuts, she explained that it was only a practice date to help him prepare for the main event. She went home early that afternoon and was trying to choose an outfit when Chihaya and Kagome got back and started asking questions. She told them she was going shopping and left to go meet Yoichi for their playdate. They first went shopping for a change of clothes at the mall. When he started complaining about them, she leaned into him with her melons, temporarily turning off his cognitive function so he would shut up. Elsewhere in the mall, Ayam was testing out a skirt with her friends, and one of them roasted her lack of melons, so she tried to yank hers out. When they saw Ibuki and told her, she ran away to avoid being seen. Yoichi and Ibuki continued their date in the bowling alley, where he broke the wall and then broke his toe with the ball. While on the ground, he stuck a peek at Ibuki's goods and got something else broken by her fist. Ayam had been spying on them the entire time with her heart slowly shattering and almost passed out when Chihaya and Kagome scared her. They wanted to watch the playdate with her, but she had seen all she needed to, so she left. While struggling to hit a single pin, Yoichi sensed someone watching, but he didn't see anyone, so he continued the bowling lessons with Ibuki. Outside the mall in a limo, the masked man that hired Tsubasa called someone else to finish the job. The pretend couple spent the rest of the day doing everything they could and eventually started to head back. After they ended up in the water fountain, she laughed it off. He gave her a stuffed cat he had bought in the mall and thanked her for the dating lessons. She had already forgotten that it wasn't an actual date and ran away embarrassed. Just then, Inagata showed up and asked for his answer to her date request. He thanked her for thinking of them but declined the date because he wasn't ready for it yet. The next moment, Inagata revealed her true colors and pulled out an extra long nunchuck from her happy hole. She immediately attacked him with it, and when he asked her why, she said it was purely business. He almost knocked her out, but her girly charm distracted him and left him open to a nasty hit. She then used a southern-style technique for her finishing move, but he easily caught her nunchuck staff mid-air and tossed her aside. With his air slice technique, he blasted her uniform to shreds, and she ran away to avoid getting her melons exposed. After he told Chihaya and Kagome to come out of the bush they were stalking him from, they went to find Ibuki, who had just taken out two attackers who were hitting on her. While they all headed back for the dojo, Inagata called the masked man who explained her failure and got hung up on. At school days later, Wasen was outside the men's room, thinking about all the man milk he had to clean off Ibuki's napkin, when Torigaya tried to use it after washing his hands. After sending him flying 50 feet away, he left to return the napkin to Ibuki. Just then, he saw her chasing Yoichi down the hall and got blasted by the air slice technique, meant for the cultured otaku. While getting checked at the nurse's office, he decided to put the napkin into an envelope with a love letter and leave it in her locker. After he was on the roof waiting for her, when Yoichi showed up with the letter after he accidentally put it in his locker. He thought Yoichi had discovered his secret crush, but thankfully, the Japanese jungle boy couldn't read properly and thought he wanted to join the dojo. He was trying to tell Yoichi to piss off with his dojo invite when Ibuki also showed up, thinking he wanted to join. Seizing the opportunity, he immediately agreed to train with them at the dojo. Elsewhere, a blindfolded swordsman turned off a bunch of candles with his blade, impressing the masked man gunning for Yoichi. Jinjuru was the successor of the Anten technique, and the masked man felt he was the perfect guy for the job. He flashed the briefcase full of cash and a picture of Yoichi, but Jinjuru wasn't someone who could be bought. He wanted to take Yoichi down simply for the sake of his honor. After the masked man left in his chopper, Jinjuru said goodbye to the friendly creatures of the woods before heading out. Later that day, Wasen and Torigaya were outside the dojo for their first class when the kids who also went there showed up and started an argument with Torigaya. Ibuki came out to greet them, and while she explained the program for the day, Wasen's obsession kept getting stronger. On the way in, his excitement to train under her immediately vanished when she told him that his instructor would be Yoichi. Moments later, Wasen was struggling to keep his eyes off Ibuki as she trained the dojo kids. Yoichi brought back his focus with a smack to the noggin that had him rolling around for a good minute while he gave instructions. After getting back up, he was about to start another fight, but Ibuki's voice got him back to his better form. Chihaya and Kagome had come to watch and were talking to Torigaya when Ayam got back from school and started looking for them. She saw Yoichi getting chased out by Ibuki for abusing Wasen with his caveman training routine. When she helped him up after the scolding, Ayam misunderstood the situation and left feeling jealous. While she was in bed sulking, Jinjuru was splitting boulders with his sword while rafting to get to Yoichi's location. Back at the dojo, Yoichi was trying a different approach with Wasen's training and wanted to start with push-ups. Claiming to be able to easily do 1,000, Wasen got on the ground, and Yoichi joined him, saying he also wanted to get back to the basics. Feeling threatened, Wasen decided to outdo him, and they started their push-up battle. By the end of the day, they both got to 1,000 and fell into their sweat pools. Kagome and Chihaya had finished prepping a feast by then, so they all sat together to eat. With their arms unable to move, Ibuki fed Wasen, giving him the best moments of his life, while Chihaya fed Yoichi. Later that night, Jinjuru's search for Yoichi had taken him to God knows where. The masked man's also masked sister had seen his epic fail from her chopper, and started to consider handling it herself. Days later, Wasen was in his room trying on outfits for the beach hangout Ibuki was planning for the next day. When Torigaya told him that the hangout was already happening, his heart shattered. On the private beach later on, Ibuki was already getting her tan on with Chihaya. They had also invited Angela and Tsubasa, who had not been to a beach before. They were discussing fun activities when Yoichi showed up dressed like he was back in his natural habitat. While Ibuki tried to get him to put on some shorts, the masked siblings were on their mega yacht watching them. This time, they had brought in the Mizunagi Surf Brothers to take Yoichi out with their hipster aura. In the dressing room, Ayame was struggling with her body dysmorphia and kept Kagome around since she was the only one with the same melons as hers. When the pads she was using to make her assets rise fell out, she bent over to pick them up, and Yoichi showed up acting like he didn't see the sign outside the room. Back on the beach, Masashi and the rest of the dojo kids asked Ibuki about Kagome. While they teased Masashi for being Kagome's bodyguard, the Mizunagi brothers were on a cliff watching Yoichi chase Ayame with her pads in his hands. To test him, they summoned a seagull and made it go after him. Yoichi was still trying to talk to Ayame when he sensed the bird and pushed her out of the way. He then got up and realized that his hands were on her mini melons. Before the cross she gave him could knock him out, he saw the bird headed for Tsubasa and rushed over to save her by pulling down the covers of her petted rice cakes. She knocked him several thousand feet in the air, and he somehow managed to land in Ibuki's mega melons. He tried to explain, but the bird came back, and he had no choice but to ram his skull into the melons again. After she nearly destroyed his face, the hipster brothers left to prepare for the takedown, and Ibuki taught them all to swim. Moments later, Yoichi was at least 100 feet out, drowning. Chihaya wanted to go save him and saw that Angela had the same idea. Seeing her monster melons, Chihaya tried to blame it on the age gap, but when Angela told her she was actually just 16, her body dysmorphia kicked in again. Ibuki noticed that Kagome wasn't swimming, so she asked her to join, but she didn't want to. Masashi also tried to convince her, and she ran away. He followed her to get her back, but after he caught up to her, they both fell into a large manhole. The fall had sprained his arm, so she made him keep his eyes closed and wrapped it with a mystery bandage. Moments later, the rest of the gang had started to get worried, so they decided to split up and find them. After a couple of minutes of searching, it was already raining, and they still couldn't find them. Tsubasa and Angela showed up and told them about the cave, but as they explained, Angela slipped off the branch and crashed her fish cake into Yoichi's face. After seeing the bird from before heading to the cave, they ran after it. Meanwhile, Kagome and Masashi had been walking through the cave and saw a light at the end. When they ran into it, they came out on the edge of a cliff, and Masashi fell off after losing his footing. He held onto a branch as the rest of the gang caught up to them, but when he lost his grip and fell into the ocean, Yoichi immediately jumped in after him. Since he couldn't swim, Yoichi started to drown again, and the hipster brothers started to close in on him. Using their boat manipulation technique, they bashed in with waves that sent Masashi sinking to the bottom. The girls gave Yoichi a floaty while Kagome jumped in to rescue Masashi and tossed Yoichi's sword to him before getting to dry land. The Surf Brothers then used a technique to summon a mega wave that swallowed Yoichi and kept him under with its insane pressure. Using a tornado technique, Yoichi escaped the megatons of water and blew the Surf Brothers into the afterlife. He immediately started drowning again, but Kagome was there with the floaty. Later that day, Ibuki was drying off Kagome while Yoichi thanked her for saving him. When Ibuki ripped off her shirt, a freshly grown pair of melons knocked Yoichi out. Apparently, she had been hiding her insane genes to protect Ayame's fragile mental state, and now the cat was out of the bag. While Yoichi was getting a nosebleed from remembering Kagome's growth spurt that night, Wasen was outside the beach after trying all day to get in and still failed. Days later, Wasen set out on a mission to finally confess his feelings to Ibuki with a love letter. After getting to a store with Torigaya, Wasen had just seen his favorite drink and tried to grab it, but someone else also wanted it. That someone was Chihaya, and she wasted no time getting into a verbal sparring session with him over the drink. While they argued, two thugs came into the store and also recognized Wasen. They hid behind an aisle and took a picture of the dreaded top thug fighting over drinks with Miss Minnie Melons. At the dojo later on, Ibuki told them to take a break, and he finally wanted to use the opportunity to give her the letter, but when she spoke to him, he chickened out. Ayame was also having a similar problem, struggling to give Yoichi a towel after Chihaya and Kagum gave her the idea. When Yoichi eventually noticed and called her, she protected her fragile emotions by roasting him for having insane BO while handing him the towel. Wasen noticed her brooding and tried to talk to her, but she told him to piss off, so he stood up to leave, and his love letter dropped out. Tsubasa came to deliver their food at that same moment and was looking forward to seeing him. When she slid open the door, she saw Wasen holding Ayame down and telling her to keep the now shredded letter a secret between them. Misunderstanding the situation, Tsubasa felt her heart shatter and ran away. Moments later, they were all at the lunch table eating and Ibuki was wondering why Tsubasa left without getting paid. Seeing the dojo kids messing with Wasen, they'd all started to compliment his recent character development. Chihaya then told them that he had single-handedly taken out the strongest delinquent group, named Skull Union, when he was in the 8th grade. Later that day, Angela went to check on Tsubasa, who was still crying and nearly became roast beef. She went down to the shop and saw Yoichi, who almost blew a brain fuse when he saw her. He wanted to return their delivery container and was about to leave when 4 thugs walked in. They were the Skull Union Wasen had taken out, and their leader, Senior Scarface, was considering a comeback after seeing Wasen's picture with Ayame. After training, Wasen was saying goodbye to Ibuki and Chihaya, while Ayame was getting cleaned up inside. She then got a surprise visit from Senior Scarface and his boys, who took her out of the dojo and went to meet Wasen while he was on his way back. After Senior Scarface showed him the store pictures and said she was his girl, they both started roasting each other again. Senior Scarface thought they were playing dumb and took off the lower half of Ayame's doji to get a reaction from Wasen. Seeing that it worked, he told Wasen to let them beat him up in exchange for her freedom. When he tried to negotiate with them, Senior Scarface loosened the top half and took pictures of her plot, threatening to delete them if he didn't comply. They all started to break pipes on his back while he stood taking them and enduring the intense roasting Senior Scarface was giving him. He called him weak for having someone he cared about, and Wasen remembered how it all started with his Torigaya and Ibuki. He had started to accept being weak when Yoichi showed up and knocked out the thugs. With his sword inches away from giving Senior Scarface a new scar, he made him release Ayame and told him that Wasen had become stronger because of his friendships. Feeling the effects of Yoichi's Sigma speech, Wasen teamed up with him and took down the Skull Nation again before smashing the phone with Ayame's mini melon picks. Yoichi complimented his new path of virtue and offered a handshake to symbolize their friendship. Just then, Ibuki came looking for Ayame, and when she saw her on the floor, she thought Yoichi had done a number on her and attacked him. Seeing Yoichi get manhandled, Wasen thought he was flirting with her and ran away with tears hanging from his eyelids. Ayame stopped him to give him a towel as a thank you, but he rejected it and told her to give it to Yoichi. It was another regular day at the dojo, and Ibuki was using her lady aura to teach the dojo kids while Wasen eye-clapped her. When Yoichi smacked him back to reality with his sword, he got fed up and ran away. While washing his head at the tap, he told Torigaya about his frustration with his feelings for Ibuki. At the top of his lungs, he confessed the way he had always planned to and turned to see Ayame, who told him to shut up before running away. He couldn't understand her weirdness, so Torigaya explained that his practiced confession sounded like he was confessing to Ayame. By then she had gotten to her room and was struggling to accept the idea that someone had confessed to her and not Ibuki. Back in the dojo, Yoichi had taken a verbal beating from Ibuki and wasn't planning on teaching anymore, so Ibuki asked Ayame to continue Wasen's lessons. He tried to explain things to her, but she kept avoiding him like a plague and knocked him out when he kept trying to get close. After she told him that he was too old and risless to be with her, he got pissed, and they ended up having the most exciting sparring match ever seen in the dojo. By the end of the day, his face was barely recognizable as he left after tweaking when Ibuki said goodbye. On the way home, he heard about a festival for the next night, and suddenly had an idea that could save his imaginary love life. On the night of the festival, he and Toragaya had been waiting for an hour when Ibuki showed up and apologized to them. After the others showed up, they'd all started talking about all the different things they wanted to do. Wasen immediately put his plan into play and suggested drawing numbers to choose someone to pair with for the festival. He had rigged the game to get the same number as Ibuki, but Toragaya's lack of IQ points resulted in him getting paired with I.M. instead. While she immediately started off by insulting his lack of testosterone, Ibuki was thinking of a way to get some attention from Yoichi. Yoichi was running around like a puppy on his first day out of the dog cage when the masked man showed up and tried to attack him with a hand fan. The next instant, Yoichi was right beside him with the fan and gave it back to him. After Yoichi introduced himself to him, Yukio took off his mask and did the same. Just then, Ibuki finally found him, and Yukio vanished to a corner where he watched her with obsession in his eyes. Moments later, Yoichi ran into Yukio's sister, who wanted him to try out a shooting game. After multiple failures, Ibuki caught up to him, and he told her to have a go with the gun. Sekan promised a trip to the hot springs if she managed to knock off the golden fish, and when she shot at it, Yukio used his fan to knock the fish down from a corner while continuing his creepy staring. Meanwhile, Wasen's night somehow kept getting worse by the minute as I.M. gave him no breaks with the verbal assault. When she called him a coward for rigging the game to get with her, he revealed the truth and told her that she was way too ugly and flat to match up with Ibuki. He'd expected her to have a comeback, but his words had obliterated her last ounce of confidence, leaving her looking like her soul had been sucked out. Just then, Yoichi was walking through their section looking for Ibuki. Wasen heard him and told her to go be with him, but she got shy and suddenly couldn't move. Before she could find her balls, Ibuki showed up to take Yoichi back, so AM gave up again. Seeing that, Wasen apologized for roasting her and told her to stop being a spineless wuss. To motivate her, he then decided to do what he had always dreamt of by grabbing Ibuki's arm and running off with her. I.M. took the memo and got Yoichi to hold her festival purse with her while they walked together. After stopping to confess his feelings, Wasen crapped himself when he saw Shibasa dressed like your sleep paralysis demon. He had mistakenly grabbed her instead of Ibuki's and was now huddled up on the ground, traumatized while Ibuki caught up with the others. I.M. snapped him out of his trauma, and when he asked if she was smiling because she finally clapped Yoichi, they started another session of verbal sparring. On their next break, the gang went to the hot springs and Ibuki had won a free trip to. Once inside, they were welcomed by the lady in charge and a bunch of helpers before they settled in. Bored out of his mind much later, Yoichi decided to go for a stroll while the girls went to try out the hot springs. Chivaya skipped the springs for a melon-shaking massage chair, while Ibuki and I.M. had a ping-pong match and realized that they were the only ones at the insanely large inn. Later that night, Yoichi was at the men's spring when Yukio showed up to talk to him about his samurai goals. After he told Yukio about his life at the dojo, Yukio called him a freeloading leech who was going to cause problems for the sisters before vanishing into the fog. At dinner, they decided to ask the lady in charge of the inn about their lack of customers. She told them about a cave behind the inn that apparently had ghosts haunting it, which in turn scared off their potential customers. After eating, Yoichi hung back and offered to help her sort out the ghost problem. Ibuki also decided to join him, and Chihaya, who had heard their conversation, went to tell I.M. about it. After Ayan left to follow Yoichi, she wanted to go work on her manga, but gas filled the entire room and knocked her out. Seeing that his gas had worked, Yukio thanked the lady of the inn, who turned out to be Sakam. Out in the woods, Yoichi was walking with Ibuki when he fell through a crack in the ground and lost her. After getting back up, he saw I.M., but she was acting differently. He tried to go look for Ibuki, but she stopped him by placing his hand on her melon and pushing him down for the best clap of his life. Elsewhere in the cave, Ibuki was also looking for Yoichi when Yukio showed up, claiming they knew each other. After telling him that she didn't know who he was, Yukio's failures started to catch up to him. She then tried to continue her search, and he pointed out Yoichi, who was about to get clapped. Seeing I.M., she claimed it was a ghost, and when Yukio told her that Yoichi was bricked, he pushed I.M. away and also called her a ghost. He had realized the truth after touching her melon, which was way bigger than the real I.M.'s. Seeing they had been exposed, Sekan ripped off the fake face and used her gas to knock them both out. Yukio carried Ibuki and told Yoichi that she was his fiancée before they turned to leave. When Yoichi somehow kept moving, Yukio decided to let him follow them back to the inn. When he eventually got back inside, Hinagata showed up and attacked him with a small ninja army Yukio had set up just for him. Yoichi managed to defeat Hinagata and the ninjas with a few moves before chasing after Yukio. He chased him into the aquarium and almost got drowned as the tanks broke apart, and the hipster brothers showed up to finish him off. After using his toes to hang off the vent, he took the brothers and sharks out with a single technique and left to find Yukio. He saw Chihaya and Kagome across the bridge, but before he could get to them, he got surrounded, and Jinjuru finally showed up. By then, Yoichi had become too weak to defend himself. Thankfully, the real I-Am was there to knock Jinjuru out. With her help, he took out the rest of the ninjas and squeezed her melon to be sure she was the real deal. He then went to question Hinagata about Ibuki's location and raced with the rest of the girls to find her in the inn. When they found her, she woke up and couldn't recognize them anymore. After getting back to the dojo the next evening, Ibuki ran in and started trying to find her parents. When they all got inside and I-Am told her about their current life with Yoichi, she flung him across the room, breaking the wall with his back. She then kept looking for their parents until I-Am told her that they were all she currently had. Ibuki believed she was 4 years old and refused to believe that they were her sisters. She only knew the younger versions of I-Am and Chihaya, and after squeezing I-Am's melons, she knew she was right. When Kagome tried to talk to her, Ibuki hit her with a death stare and told her to stop touching her. I-Am got pissed and tried to scold her, but Chihaya reminded her that Ibuki was technically 4 years old in the head and didn't know better. Ibuki ran off crying, and later that evening, Yoichi found her outside and convinced her to follow him back in. Seeing her hand in his, I-Am got jealous, and they all went to eat dinner. While they ate, Tsubasa had heard about what happened and left to go help them. Angela was trying to find a way to get more money when she recognized someone who came in. The next day at the dojo, Ibuki knocked Masadi out and put on a little melon juggling show for the boys. After, Yoichi and the girls were dealing with another one of Ibuki's episodes when Yukio and Sakon showed up. They explained that Sakon's potion had caused Ibuki's condition, and that an antidote would take months. They had also been spying on them since the hot springs and noticed that they were having problems taking care of Ibuki. To help, Yukio offered them the daily life of the top 1%, while he would be the one to take care of Ibuki. Around that time, Ibuki was playing and fell down at the entrance to the compound, where Wasen and Toragaya saw her. After she begged Wasen to take her away, he thought the gods were smiling on him and took her to the park after getting her some new clothes. Toragaya noticed her weird behavior and wanted to leave to get answers at the dojo, but she begged Wasen to stay with her, so he did. At the dojo, Yukio pulled Yoichi aside and told him to leave the dojo as he was useless to the sisters. To help him continue his training, he brought in Angela, who was ready to let him join them to restart their own dojo. Moments later, he decided to leave and went to tell I-Am. By then, Toragaya was at the dojo and told them what had happened, so Tsubasa ran off to meet Wasen. I-Am claimed that they were better off without him and tried to ask for Kagome's opinion, but she wasn't there. They found her in the room, crying with the art project Ibuki had broken again in her hand. Seeing her tears, Yoichi decided that he was going to take one last shot at saving Ibuki, and the girls joined him. At the park, one of Yukio's men showed up and tried to take Ibuki, so Wasen fought him off until he dropped him with a taser. He then took Ibuki to the limo, where Yukio was waiting, and knocked her out with the gas. That night, Yukio went to check on Ibuki and heard her call out the names of her siblings and Yoichi, as her memories were slowly returning. Using a map, Yoichi and the girls got to Yukio's mansion, and he used his technique to chop off logs to create a route so they could get to the mansion. Sakon had seen them coming, and after talking to Yukio about it, she met them at the entrance and gave them the news of Yukio's wedding to Ibuki. When I-Am told her to shove the invite up her trust fund rice cakes, she ordered her maids to add a couple of holes to their bodies. After the gun smoke cleared, she saw that Yoichi had protected them and tried to use her poison, but he used his technique to pull an Uno reverse that took out the entire maid army. Yoichi then caught up to her and used his riz to soften her iced-out heart. With a slap of dominance, she put him in his place but still gave them a chance to save Ibuki. After getting past her, they ran into the second unit of men in black and fought them off until a chop to the neck dropped Yoichi. Just then, Wasen, Tsubasa, and Angela showed up to help them out. After Toragaya tossed him the metal knuckles, things got heated until Sakon blew up half the bridge, separating them in the process. To level the playing field, Angela used the cloth rip move to activate Tsubasa's assassin mode and Wasen saved Torigaya from the butlers before they continued the fight. After Yoichi and the girls got inside, Jidea found the correct path that led them to the marriage altar. Yoichi stopped Yukio from continuing the ceremony and told him to release Ibuki, who started struggling with her memories after seeing her sisters. Yukio left Sekon to handle them and left the floor with Ibuki on the self-elevating altar. When they all told Sekon to get a life, instead of being her older brother's chief of security, she broke down in tears. Yoichi used that to chase Yukio with his mad hops and eventually got to the roof, where he challenged him to a proper duel. Yukio gave him the first taste of his power with a special fan technique, and Yoichi told him that Sakura could do better than that. Yukio decided to turn up the heat with his strongest technique, and Yoichi countered with a blizzard technique that tossed him a few hundred feet into the air. After he fell back to the roof, Yoichi told him to spend his money on a good trainer. As the sun started to rise, Ibuki recognized Yukio, and as her sisters also showed up, she recognized Kagome before falling off the roof. Sekon stopped Yukio from jumping after her, while Yoichi and the girls all took off like winged squirrels to save her. Using his scarfing technique, he broke their fall, but after they all surfaced and reunited, he started to sink and grabbed onto Ibuki's melons for safety. He took a gravity-canceling uppercut and got excited to finally have her back to normal. Days later, they were back at the dojo, and he sent a letter to his dad with an arrow. Tsubasa went back to work delivering noodles. Ibuki was teaching already, and he was still rising up by Am without even trying. With Yoichi's harem getting back to its usual cultured ways, maybe they will finally notice that Torigaya kept getting younger, probably after finding a Lazarus pit. That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.